listening to Not So Live from Asteroid G. I'm Mike Finkelstein. With me in the booth now, as always, is...
Hey, it's Luffy, the other Mike. How you doing?
Hey, this week we are going to be discussing Halloween. It's not Halloween, it's nowhere near Halloween, but the most recent Halloween just recently came out on Blu-ray, and I finally got a chance to watch it. And since we haven't actually talked about the Halloween series on this podcast at all, it seemed like the right time to actually discuss the movies from the very earliest all the way down to the latest, because now most of the movies aren't good, but when they're good, they're really good.
Yeah, this franchise, I got the wiki pulled up just so I can get some of the information correct.
Mhm.
It's my favorite horror franchise of all time.
Mm-hmm.
13 movies
Yeah,
spanning 45 years. I
yeah,
mean, that is legit, right? I
it is.
mean, some staying power and longevity there. And the first one, I mean, is an absolute masterpiece in horror.
Mm-hmm.
Classic. The second one, pretty good, and we'll talk about the rest of these as we go. But I'm excited. This is really near and dear to my heart. I'm happy to be here for it.
Well, and it's interesting to look at them because the series that we eventually ended up with wasn't really what was intended at all.
Hmm.
Since John Carpenter made the first one and then had someone else direct the second one while he worked on the music and story and so forth. But
Yeah.
the first two were meant to tie up the Michael Myers storyline completely. He gets stabbed in both eyes by the end of it, and he melts. Is
Hmm.
burned to death, and he's supposed to stay dead, which is why the third movie, Season of the Witch, is a completely different story. Like,
That doesn't exist. We don't talk about that one.
I mean, it's part of the franchise. You said 13 movies. It's one of those
Yeah,
movies. All right?
it is. Let's
Yes.
keep it. Let's keep it an even dozen. This is a bit not a
It's a
baker's dozen here
baker's
because
dozen.
that one's let's spoil. It's honestly though, it's a fine movie for what it
It's fun.
is. If it was any other thing but Halloween 3, it'd be a fine horror movie.
Well,
But
or if they had just committed to the bit and instead of getting scared off of it, continued with the anthology concept, then
right.
number three wouldn't seem so weird. But it is very much the completely odd duck that doesn't belong in the franchise.
I felt like that one they tried to really like tie into like the lore of like Sam Hain and all
Mm-hmm.
that, and
Mm-hmm.
really kind of like hit on that, which they really touched on in the first one and whatnot. But it just didn't have the same kind of impact without Michael
No,
there.
no. Well, it didn't have the it speaks to the thing about what Michael Myers brought to the franchise that
Hmm.
that movie most specifically did not. It didn't have a compelling villain. The weird
Hmm.
dude that wanted to tap into the magic of Stonehenge and his robotic assassin killers. None of
Yeah.
that's none of that spoke to what Michael Myers was like. Um,
Hmm.
and it wasn't a central figure that really worked. Corporate greed from this guy that we barely see at all is not the same as the shape hanging out in the back of your yard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the scary, ominous presence that Michael is around
Mm-hmm.
every corner, behind every hedge, is really lacking in that movie. It's
Mm-hmm.
scary. It had its moments. It's got some
Moments.
decent effects in there too. It's fine. The twist at the end is definitely like one that he was like, whoa, okay, that's kind of weird. But like, the masks that like melt kids' faces and all that, and that horrible Silver Shamrock jingle that
Oh
I
my
just still
god.
hear in my nightmares sometimes. But
Happy
it's fine.
Halloween though. I mean
Oh my god, it's bad. It's bad. But again, this it's a great franchise and it's a part
Mhm,
of it, so
mhm.
it's fine.
It
But
is. It's part of it, and I think it's the most interesting one of the early movies to discuss because, like, the first movie is a classic,
right.
absolute classic. We could spend an hour just discussing how John Carpenter builds tension and tone, and in fact, we spent 5 minutes discussing that in our horror villains podcast from a couple weeks ago. So, I
Right.
mean, I don't necessarily feel the need to touch upon it, but
Hmm.
like in comparison to that movie, there's no tension, there's no dark tone in the same respect. Halloween 3's it's a movie that really did belong in a different franchise entirely because it's like the first one's very grounded and very serious and
Hmm.
it exists in the real world, and the third movie is like there's magical Stonehenge magic and it
Yeah.
melts kids' brains. Like, what the fuck movie are we? This has nothing to do with even the world of Michael Myers, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The scariest thing that movie had going for it is the actual artwork on the box cover, which
Yeah, yeah,
I'd forgotten how creepy that is with like the three kids in like the witch's outfit and
yeah.
the season of the witch, like the Halloween 3 drawn out underneath her
Mhm.
as her hair. It's a creepy looking cover,
Good cover. It's a good
I'll give it
cover.
that. That's pretty good artwork.
It's about it. It's about that. No
Yeah.
one cares about that. So the first two movies are probably for me, I would rank them number one and number two for the entire franchise. The second one is gorier and dumber and more
Mhm,
violent, but it's at
mhm.
least a decent continuation of that Halloween night. It doesn't hold a candle to the first one, but then, in my opinion, none of the movies that have come out since hold a candle to that first one. And
Yeah,
in
you
fact, most slasher movies don't hold a candle to that first one.
yeah, the only slasher franchise which had a better second movie than the first movie that I can think of off the top of my head was Friday the 13th.
Hmm.
So, the Halloween first movie, it's basically almost perfection in a horror
Hmm.
suspense kind of, category. The body count's not high, the gore is minimal.
Yeah.
It's just very suspenseful and scary, and just, I mean, it could be any teenager who's a babysitter, and that's the whole point.
And I think that's what John Carpenter understood. He looked at the I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, but the giallo, the Italian not blood fests, not quite slashers, but
Mhm.
giallo, whatever it's called. Um, he looked at those, and he looked at Black Christmas, which is a proto slasher without necessarily being as slashery as what was to come.
Right,
Um,
right.
and he built a movie that took what worked from those, a bit of gore, a bit of blood, but really tension and waiting for the kill. Every movie to
Mhm.
come out since that one in the genre as a whole, I mean, we're talking like 35, 45 years at this point because of,
Yeah.
how many slashers we've gotten.
Mhm.
A lot of them prioritize kills over tension. Like
Yeah.
one of the best of the genre that I would hold up anywhere near Halloween is the first Scream, because that one
Yeah.
not only builds comedy into, and I think comedy is a key point of horror in general, like to
Right.
relieve tension once in a while, but it doesn't prioritize the kills. It spends a lot of time with the characters letting the tension build before it even starts releasing the kills.
It's the whole trust thing, the kids, like, anybody could be the killer is the whole
Mm-hmm.
point of the movie. And,
Mm-hmm.
for what Halloween and what Scream did very well also was the music to
Yes.
kind of set the mood,
Mm-hmm.
the dreary, dark doldrums that Halloween goes to, with Scream having, modern day music kind of set the tone for any situation in that movie. It just really, soundtrack is important
It is.
when it comes some movies. It really can make or break a movie. It can make a good movie outstanding, and it can make a good movie terrible. And these are really two good examples of soundtracks done well in movies.
Yeah, the one thing that the future of the series really preserved was the Halloween theme. Just like,
Mhm.
in my head, every time I hear Red Right Hand, I think of Scream.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Exactly.
yeah, that's
Exactly.
exactly right. And
Hmm.
so, as the series moved on from those first two films, which, I mean, in my opinion, we could have just had those first two and just been done with it, and they would have just been classics sitting on the
Yeah,
shelf together.
it would have
Um,
been fine.
it would have been fine. The series tried to figure out what the hell to do, especially since star Jamie Lee Curtis didn't really want to come back for them at the time. So
Yeah.
so we got her abandoned daughter, the niece of Michael Myers, which I think this is the worst thing that the second movie did. And this is part of the reason why I don't like the second movie, and I really hate the movies like in comparison that came out after, even though I think number four is the best of the later sequels.
Right.
Um,
Right.
it's the best of the later sequels because they started developing his story, and I don't
Hmm.
want Michael Myers' story. Like
Hmm.
he's at his best when he's just this dark shape hanging out. And the new movies, the new trilogy that we got more recently, tried to remove that, even though they have so many of their own flaws that I just can't care about them. But
Yeah.
the second you're like Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' sister, you've already explained too much.
They really tried to just like make a connection there
Hmm.
as to why he targeted her so passionately, and I guess that was the best I could come up with. I mean, I'm looking. They had 7 years in between Halloween 2 and Halloween 4, not counting Halloween 3, which was a year after
Yeah.
Halloween 2. But 7 years, and like you came up with something that I guess is basic and could work. But I mean, to your point, you didn't get Jamie Lee back.
Yep.
Um, the original Scream Queen. She was the darling of that movie. She made those movies what they were,
Hmm.
and you took it the Laurie Strode family route, which is fine, and it still works
Fine.
to this day with some of the movies. But you really kind of you fabricated something to just continue a plot that, I mean, really could have ended at two.
It could have ended too. I mean, if they hadn't said he's your brother in that first sequel, then
Mm,
Michael Myers would have just come back to Haddonfield once in a while, burned but still able to somehow function, and he would just kill random babysitters for the hell of it. And that's far scarier than him being like, I have a psychic connection to my niece and I must go kill her now. And then
Yeah, and
giving her a psychic connection back to him so she starts killing in his name in the fifth movie. Like, what the fuck are we watching?
I don't know. I mean, they really, those two movies are really where they started ramping up the gore as
Yes.
well,
Mm-hmm.
and really just kind of making these kills really um, impactful and statement kills on the screen. Like in the ambulance ride when he puts his thumb through the guy's forehead. That
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, okay, he has that kind of strength. I kind of figured that, but I
Yeah.
hadn't seen him do that before.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm.
And he really just morphed into this embodiment of evil with also superhuman abilities, which I mean, that's fine. Like he's going to keep coming, and that's the whole point. But it was definitely an interesting call, I think.
He morphed into Jason with a William Shatner mask, is what he became.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think they kind of saw what Jason was doing, what
Mm-hmm.
to a degree Freddy was doing,
Yep.
and the impact of those movies. And like, okay, we gotta stick with this. What can we have Michael do? We can have him be Jason, like you said, in a William Shatner mask, doing the same kind of thing, but just to this one family, and that's our shtick.
Yeah, we have to have a reason. We have to have a supernatural killer. We have to pursue this storyline, which the Friday the 13th didn't do, but they borrowed a page from the Nightmares, which, like, from number 3 onward, tried to do a continuous story for, like, a whole trilogy of films. And, I mean, I'm happy to talk about the Nightmares at some point. I think of all the slasher series, Nightmare had the best third film of the franchises. So, yeah.
Yep, we can definitely hit on that at some
We
point.
could at some point, but yeah, no, it's they strengthened the connection and they prioritized kills over tension. It's because so few people are John Carpenter. You watch the Halloween, you watch The Thing. He was at
Mhm.
his prime directing tension in those movies.
Yeah, and really brilliance, directing wise, and to hit on Scream again. I mean, who was the director of that?
Wes Craven.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another absolute horror icon
Mm-hmm.
who did amazing work and was, part of Friday the 13th as well. So, I mean, there's a
Nightmare.
reason. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why I'm a Nightmare. Thank you. I get
Yep.
them confused sometimes in my mind. But
Fine.
yeah,
I
Nightmare.
understand.
But like you got two people here that are iconic in what they created for these franchises that are endearing and lasting to this day, which is something.
Yeah. No, it's I mean it is interesting like what they brought and how little that people could understand what was going on. I mean, we could touch upon the sixth movie, but I don't even feel like Curse of Michael Myers is worth discussing. It's just bad.
It's a weird one.
Bad.
I had to pull up the wiki to check it because I've seen all these, and that was
Uh-huh.
probably one that I'd seen once. It
Yeah.
was like whatever, it's fine.
They went in
4 and
hard on the
5 were
Sam
fine.
they went
Yeah,
in hard on the Sam Hain angle and they really wanted to explain the magic of Michael Myers and you're just like,
yeah.
we did this with number 3 and magic and Irish shit and we
Mhm.
don't need this again. This was we forgot about it the last time. Stop reminding us.
I'm looking at the order of these movies, and it was like 1, 2, Sam Hain, and then they redid this. Okay, 4, 5, and then we'll try Sam Hain again and fail a second time. So
Yep.
let's move on and just stick with Michael doing Michael things.
So they reinvent it again, and this is where
Mhm.
the franchise starts to get its reputation. Number 3 is bad enough sitting off in its own continuity, of course. But then
Right.
they decide to reboot away 4, 5, and 6 for
Hmm.
Halloween H2O, where Laurie Strode comes back, no longer has a daughter, but a son, and everyone
Hmm.
conveniently forgets everything that happened in Haddonfield for the last 15 years.
Yeah, and she's like a headmistress at like some school.
Yeah,
That
operating under a different name secretly, and somehow
Yeah,
Michael just knows where she is.
yeah, because Psychic Michael, who also
Psychic
has
Michael.
superhuman powers.
And it's like he was 6 when he killed someone, and they're like, "Well, he figured out where the doctor lived, and he killed him, and he stole all the paperwork." I'm like, "He can read?
Right, right.
Since when have we ever established that Michael could read?"
Well, I mean, someone taught him how to drive, right? Quoting
Right.
Dr. Loomis.
I was willing to buy that more if it was an automatic. You can kind of stumble your way into it, but reading is actually far more complex for a brain that doesn't know how to do it. Like,
Yeah.
really?
Interesting cast. I'm looking at the casting of them. I mean, Jamie Lee, obviously, Adam
Hmm.
Arkin,
Hmm.
Michelle Williams, LL Cool J, Josh Hartnett, and a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I mean,
It's a
honestly,
stacked
some
cast.
some star power there in a pretty bad horror movie that
Yeah.
I love, but I mean, let's face it, it's pretty
It's
bad.
Of the sequels, it's one of the more watchable. It's up there with number 4. It still prioritizes kills over tension. It still
Mhm.
doesn't really understand what to do with the characters long term.
Right.
But it was, I mean, written script by Kevin Williamson, who did Scream,
Hmm.
which showed that even he could write a bad movie once in a while. Um,
Yeah.
but it was a movie. It existed. It wasn't bad. People liked it as a reboot to the franchise, so much so that it got a terrible sequel.
Yeah, and
Resurrection.
sticking with like what they did here, Lori, was still the headmistress, guilt ridden for
Mm.
killing her brother at the end of it, chopping his head off.
Why?
Who,
Why are you
oh,
guilt? You set him on fire before. Why are you guilt ridden now?
I don't know. I guess proving she's still human, and even though her brother is the embodiment of evil, she still has some good. I guess I don't know. You
Uh,
would think like by now, just cut his head off and watch him burn. I mean,
yeah,
he's gonna do that to you anyway.
right. He has no regrets. Why should you?
Yeah, yeah,
Ugh.
but it's a fine movie again, full of body counts, full of gore, and again, pretty star-studded cast there. Thomas Ian Nichols, Tyra Banks, Jamie Lee Curtis, obviously Busta Rhymes making an appearance. So we got LL Cool J and Busta Rhymes both in Halloween movies. Both of them playing security guards, I think, as well, which I think is pretty funny.
I think Busta Rhymes was he a security guard or was he just
I know,
one
but
of
he
the
was a
people in the
cameraman.
show?
He was one of the
Yeah, there
cameramen,
you
I
go.
think.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. Or
Yeah.
the tech guy in the van, actually, I think is what he was. So I mean,
Yep.
just it's fine. I mean, they really kind of started laying into like the almost the hokiness of this,
Yes. Yes. It
and
is
really
hokey.
kind of a little bit, and Scream kind of set like the movie formula, and it felt like these were two movies that kind of followed that formula that
They
Scream
tried to be
laid out
squeamish
there.
without. Well,
Yeah.
it's weird trying to be Scream when you have a killer you already know.
Right,
Yeah.
and you trying to they almost like they tried to like do something different but same at the same time, and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't really
Doesn't
work
work the
for me.
same way. No.
Yeah, it was all right. The
I
next two movies though, I'm a fan.
I
I gotta
like the
say.
first of the two. I think it's interesting. Rob Zombie had an idea that I think was actually worth exploring, which was we already know everything that's going on with Lori, whether or not she's going to be his sister or not, and that's his own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we already know everything that's going on with Lori, with the kills, with all of that. We don't know a lot about Michael, and if we're going to actually try and define him as a character, then let's not define him as the shape. Let's do something else. I thought going back and exploring his life before he became a serial killer was
Mm-hmm.
far more investing and interesting than it had any right to be, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. And shout out to Rob Zombie, another one of those like, B-list horror directors that does some really amazing stuff. He really took this and like you remember in the beginning in 1978 where you see Michael when he's wearing the clown mask and he kills his sister, but it's like a
Mhm.
loving home or something. The
Yep.
father and the mother come home in the station wagon. What happened to our daughter? No, Rob Zombie went the route of like, this kid grew up in a really shitty environment doing shitty things, and shittier and shittier and shittier pushed him over the edge, and he snapped and he started killing people. And I could buy that.
Yeah, no, I could. I think the development of exploration of what makes a person snap like this was interesting. Now, I think the problems with that movie come in like in the last couple acts or so, where it tries to condense the entirety of the 1978 movie into like
Mhm.
one big quick climax. It loses its power when you adapt it into a single act of a larger film.
Right.
Um, like I could have just watched an entire movie of just young Michael leading up to his clown mask kill at the end of it, and I think that would have been great. If you
Hmm.
want to cover the other two movies later, save them for other movies. In my opinion, that last act is kind of squiffy for me. And
Yeah.
the second movie is just, in my opinion, it's just overloaded kill garbage.
It really felt like House of a Thousand Corpses meets Halloween.
Yeah,
If you've ever seen that, it's just
I
there's
have.
so much. Yeah, of course you have. I mean,
Of
that's
course
why
I
we're doing this
have.
together, because we have a lot of the same interests. I mean that like I we talked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from like the early
Hmm.
2000s, like making me just like uncomfortable in the theater to the
Yes.
point of like just be. That's how I felt in House of a Thousand Corpses too.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and Rob, but I enjoyed it more because it was coming from Rob Zombie rather than just some random director. So I trust his process, um, but it definitely it was gore porn
It
in
was.
there, and you felt it. The story wasn't as compelling as the
Hmm.
first 50 minutes of the first one. It kind of, but I mean, how much more could you do unless you, like you said, you take this first movie and you make it all about Michael as a kid
Yeah.
leading up to that first kill? And I think that would have been tremendously successful. I don't know how many people would have, ran out to see it aside from, certain horror fans, but I think it would have been really well received by the people that would care.
Like if you called it Halloween Origins and you just did it and you actually function it as almost a prequel to the first movie, I think it could have worked. You didn't necessarily need any of the sequels at that point. It could just stand on its own. And if it was successful, you then find some other sequel to whatever part of the franchise you wanted to do. Which, I mean,
Mhm.
is what they did when the second one didn't do as well, and the production company got cold feet over doing any further films that Rob Zombie wanted to do. He had a trilogy planned, which I
Mhm.
lamented at the time that I wouldn't have wanted to watch a third one with how awful the second one was for me. But
Right.
I mean, you got an artist with a vision who wants to do it. I always feel bad when the artist doesn't get to pursue their vision. You know?
Yeah. There's still a chance that that might get done and
Hmm.
picked up somewhere. I mean, it's there was a 9 year gap in between Halloween 2 and the Danny McBride kind of reboot ish that we got the last three installments of. So I mean, there could be someone out there, willing to throw Rob Zombie a couple $1 million to kind of pull in and do another one. I could see it happening,
I mean,
but
I
per,
would say it unlikely, except we've seen plenty of reboots that then shove aside other reboots to go back and
right?
do previous ones. Like we're getting they're supposedly doing a new RoboCop that acts as a sequel only to the first RoboCop and is going to
Yeah,
ignore both the sequels, the TV shows, and the new RoboCop movie we got just to get one RoboCop. You know, like
yeah.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. It's
There's
what
there's a
Hollywood
lot of
does.
hoops to yeah, there's a
Mhm.
lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of suspension of disbelief. I mean, it's not the greatest franchise in the world, RoboCop, but it's a
I
pretty
enjoy it.
solid
The
movies in
first
there.
one,
I enjoy
the
it.
first one.
First one's very good, and
Yeah.
again, there's a theme here
Hmm.
with movie franchises where the first one's usually the best one. There's very few that I can think of, and I'm sure we can come up with a couple of, if we really put our heads to it. The first one is really the gold standard in any franchise, and that kind of holds true in RoboCop along with Halloween and several others, many others, I'm sure. So, but
Well,
Murphy, pretty good hero. I mean,
yeah. It's interesting because when you look at it, and I do not debate the fact that the new Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie at least stay true to Rob Zombie's vision, whatever it may be. The best of
mhm,
the horror movies and sci fi and whatever franchise you're looking at tend to stay true to the vision of the original in one form or another. About the only movie I can think of that where the sequel is as good or better than the original, even though it goes in a completely different direction vision wise, is Aliens, and that's because you had a different Artur director take over for the sequel.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's one that came to my head when I was mentioning, it's hard to find a movie that is not as
Hmm.
good as the first one.
Hmm.
But you got two directors there, different visions between James Carpenter and
John Carpenter.
so James Cameron,
Oh, James
James
Cameron. Yeah.
Cameron,
Ridley Scott.
and Ridley Scott. Yeah,
Hmm.
the suspense and just really, in space, no one can hear you scream.
Hmm.
That Ridley Scott put out there in the first Alien movie to the absolute overloaded action,
Hmm.
tastefully really well done, some gore, but also just really great character development that James Cameron does in Aliens. Two really great movies back to back, and I think Aliens is higher rated on like IMDb than
Hmm.
Alien, but they're both in the very high 90s. I would think they're two really beautifully brilliant movies.
Oh yeah. Not so brilliant, to bring it back to topic. The trilogy of the new Halloweens from 2018 on. I had
Yeah.
such high hopes for these, and I felt betrayed by what I got. Like the first act of the new one's okay. It's the
Hmm.
requisite setup for story and so forth. But there's a point where the movie like lets Michael Myers free and he starts wandering around Haddonfield, and all the tension of
Hmm.
the movie just gets drained away. The movie doesn't know how to direct horror. It just doesn't.
Yeah. I was a big fan of hearing Danny McBride wanting to be a part of this because I
Mhm.
think he's a pretty good comedian. I think he does some really good movies.
Mhm.
And anytime you have a fan kind of grabbing hold of a franchise to kind of like put them, interject some life into it, you got some hopes as another fan watching a fan do this, and then sometimes creative liberties are taken or the vision is not what you would expect as a fan. And then again, sometimes you get these movies that are fine, but still in a way just pretty bad.
Yeah, I think it's the problem is the fact that David Gordon Green and Danny McBride didn't get horror. Like it just
Yeah.
like at a certain level they just don't get how horror needs to function. There's a sequence that I wanted to love in the first of the three new Halloween movies.
Hmm.
It's almost a wonder where you watch Michael wander through the backyard of a place, then wander into a kitchen, and then pull in and stab someone in their house, and then continue walking. And I can see how a wonder concept like that would be interesting. Where if you did the focus right and you kept it like following the woman instead of Michael, and you just saw glimpses of him, how that would work to build tension before he finally just emerges and kills her. But the
Hmm.
way it's filmed, like somehow they drain all the tension out of it and it's not shocking when anything happens. And that's indicative of that whole first movie.
It almost feels like they tried to like hit that scene in the second movie
Mhm.
from the 70s where you hear the news going on and the husband's in the living room watching the news and the wife's in the kitchen making a sandwich and she leaves the knife on the counter and leans over to go see what the husband is watching and listen, and she comes back and reaches for the knife and it's just like a trail of blood there,
Yeah.
that you knew the killer was right there next to you. And that mark was certainly missed in this situation.
Yeah. And the second one does that big problem that so many do. They had a body count that they had in the first movie, and they had to exceed it. The second one is just ludicrous with how many kills happen in it. It's just dumb. Like I called Rob Zombie's sequel, like gore porn, but the
Mhm.
second one of these Halloween kills just goes so over the top. It loses all sense of like anything. Like I stopped caring. Like it just went on too long.
At the end of the movie, when the posse and the mob is all over him and they're beating him to death, and they think they won and it's all over, and then suddenly here comes Michael and we break everybody's neck and snap them all in half. There's 20 guys here and it doesn't matter anymore because I'm Michael and I'm death incarnate.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, oh crap, we got to wrap this up, but we got to get another like dozen kills in here to kind of top what we did the first time. How can we do
yeah,
that? Oh, let's just throw it all at the end and just have it just a big massacre,
yeah.
and it'll be fine. People will buy it.
Yeah, there's that massacre, and then there's the massacre at the park at the halfway point where like
Yeah.
8 people die in stupid fashion very quickly. And it is stupid. They act the dumbest they possibly could to give this guy who doesn't run a chance to catch them. And you're like, guys, how are you letting him kill you? Come on.
He's around every corner, and no matter how fast you run, he's always right there. And I guess that's
So
just
stupid.
kind of the point.
So stupid. I will say, of the three of them, I actually kind of liked the third one. I don't like how it wrapped up, but I
Hmm.
felt like the third one had an interesting idea and having like, and this is spoilers for someone who hasn't seen it, but who fucking cares? You've either watched it or you're not going to.
You're not listening to this if you haven't watched
Exactly.
it.
Like they position a new character to try kind of like take over from Michael. Well, I don't
Hmm.
think they did the transition very well because the way they set up his character, he shouldn't be a killer by the end of it. It just doesn't work in that respect.
Right.
But like I liked the idea of someone being inspired by him and taking over from him, and like
Hmm.
maybe letting Michael take credit for the kills that he's doing, so that when Michael dies, as Halloween ends has to have happen, he can
Hmm.
then carry on in some other town, continuing the tradition. I thought that would have been interesting. That's absolutely not what the movies did. In the end, they killed both of them, and it's a complete waste of time all around. But there
Yeah.
was an interesting idea there.
They again trying to reformulate what maybe did or did not work in the earlier parts of the franchise
Uh
was
huh.
the connection between Michael and his niece is now
Uh
this,
huh.
the connection of the evil between the new killer and Michael in this movie, and like Laurie discovering like the evil is infecting him now. Oh my god, we got to do something about it, we got
It's
to take
dumb.
them both down.
Yeah.
it, I don't know how you explain the manifestation of Michael, just how he can keep coming without trying to hit upon it as being just like this force of evil.
Mhm.
But it's not something that I think is transition able to be transmission between different people. I don't
No.
see it as a force. I see it as just Michael.
Yeah, I'm like there's a scene where the new kid finds Michael, pushes a body in between them. Michael kills the body and then just stares at the kid and is like, "Yeah, we cool." And I'm
Hmm.
sitting there going like, "No, as soon as he's killed the one dude, he then kills the other dude and continues on with his life because that's what he does."
Yeah, he
Like,
does
no,
not stop. He has no emotion. He has
no,
no remorse. I mean,
no,
Loomis said it. There's nothing there,
nothing
just
there.
darkness. And now all of a sudden there's a connection
Yeah.
with someone he's never met. But and shouldn't really be there in the first place because of the situation that put them there. It wasn't like it was someone that sought him out. It's very strange.
I mean,
But I mean,
if they'd had him wear a clown mask, so maybe that triggers something in Michael, that would have made more sense. They didn't do that.
yeah,
Um,
something to kind of,
yeah,
like some connection that just
yeah,
was
something.
not there.
Yeah,
And yeah, whatever. I mean, Blumhouse gonna Blumhouse, and it was
mm.
fine.
They've
And
Blumhoused better Blumhouses than this one. I will say that
yeah,
much.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. Very true. But
it
it was okay. I
was
mean,
okay.
but the franchise, it'll go on another hiatus now for another 5 to 7 years, and then someone will pick it back up. And it'll, the first one will probably be pretty good, and then the residuals after that'll be fine again, and then this will just continue forever.
Yep.
Like, the horror is not going anywhere.
They
There's
say
a
Halloween
reason.
ends, but it
Yeah,
doesn't.
it doesn't. You're
It
not
doesn't.
gonna this 45-year franchise is not gonna go away just because they made one movie and they said, okay, this is it. No, this is gonna keep going. Bond has been forever. Dracula has been forever. Halloween is gonna be forever, just like the other ones. Friday the 13th Nightmare. They're
Hmm.
gonna keep going. There's no reason for these to end. Fans love them. They want to see them, and we're gonna get them. It's just gonna be a while, but in between, and it's fine.
Just wait another 10 years since when the first trilogy started. Find some
Mhm.
other excuse for Laurie Strode to come back and be chased by him again. It'll happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Or,
We'll have some other new Jamie Lee kind of scream
mhm.
queen at that point. We'll see.
I mean, I like legitimately, I could still see having gone through what she's gone through. Allison, the granddaughter in this movie, going
Mhm.
off and like becoming a psycho killer on her own. She's been through a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
will say though, at the end of the second one with the when the daughter died,
Uh huh.
I was like, wow, I did not think they were gonna kill her, and they actually did.
Yeah.
Poor Judy Greer. Oh my God, like they actually did it.
She probably
So
wanted out.
she probably did. She's like, I gotta
Probably
get
did.
out of here while they're getting good.
Yeah.
So let's just take me out at the end, and I'll just
Yeah.
keep going and
I'm good
collect
with
my
that.
paycheck.
Yeah. I'm good with the 2 paychecks I got. I can get out now.
Yeah, man,
Uh,
but what can you do?
yeah. So yeah, I like the first one. I think the second, the fourth, and the seventh are tolerable. Uh,
Mhm.
but nothing has risen to the heights of that first one.
Nah, and you're never going to be able to reconnect to that kind of a thing.
No.
It's there's 30, 40 movies in the lifetime of cinema that that are just connecting on levels with fans that just
I mean,
will never be able to get touched again, and that's probably one of them.
if you talk about it, that's 3 or 4 movies out of a series of 13 that are actually decent enough to go back and watch again. That's pretty good. I've gone through the James Bond movies, which is 26 of them, and I don't know how many of those I would rewatch again. Maybe one Connery, the George Lazenby, and a couple Daniel Craigs. That's about it.
Mhm,
Like that's a
mhm.
low batting average for a franchise, you know?
Yeah, I like Bond. I'm a big fan of that. We can talk about that at one point too. I like the Bond
Sure,
movies.
I'll happily
I'm down
talk
with that.
Bonds.
I'm down with that for sure. And but yeah, I mean, there's some of those movies. I mean, you want to talk hokey. I
Oh
mean,
God, everything
that
with Roger Moore in it. Oh my God.
definitely. There's an interesting bunch of Bond in there if you're a fan. I mean, we'll just not speak of it here, but it's fun.
Bold statement. Roger
Yeah.
Moore is the Halloween 6 of the James Bond franchise. I will let you guys stew on that.
To be continued out there.
This has been Not So Live from Asteroid G. I'm Mike Finkelstein. I swear I'm not the shape, even though I'm standing in your backyard. And with me was...
This is the other Mike Luffy. We'll see you guys in your nightmares, everybody.